Nice. Well, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. Experience AI Solution is very happy to have you here with us today. And we appreciate you taking the time to attend this webinar. You might be working or you might have your own schedule, so thank you again. My name is Joshua John, and I will be your host today. I have been in industry for over 9 years and over 2 years, almost 2 years with Experience AI Solutions. And today, as you will know, we will be presenting you an interactive webinar entitled Improving Your CV. Just before we start, I would like to remind you of a few things. During the webinar, you can interact with me and ask questions via Q&A or using the chat section. So chat section will be the discussion. You will see during the webinar, we will ask you some interactive questions. Feel free to use the chat section. And with Q&A, if you have specific questions, you can mention it to there and we will try our best to answer you. And feel free to ask if you have any questions, and Kim will also be asking questions during the webinar. So if you would like to respond to that, do that. If you don't know, it must be right below your screen, and there is a Q&A section and the chat section. Now, without any delay, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Mrs. Kim Beardsell, entitled Improving Your CV. Over to you, Kim.
Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us. So my name is Kim Beardsell. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Experience. So just a little bit of background on me. I've been with Experience about going on 4.5 years soon, and in the recruitment industry for about 12 years. I've always worked specifically in the IT sector. And so that's a little bit about me. So it's unfortunate yet inevitable that everyone is going through a difficult time right now. So we wanted to put together a program that would help you navigate the new job market reality with all the uncertainties that are caused by COVID-19. So some people are super familiar with Zoom, but some others might not be quite as familiar with particularly the webinar version that we're using today. So as Josh said, we're going to use both the chat and the Q&A functions. So any questions you have, post them in the Q&A. Josh is going to be monitoring that, and he'll do his best to respond to you directly. If it is sort of a more lengthy answer, then there's parts throughout the webinar where I'll pause, and then he'll let me know that questions have come in, and then I'll answer them then. And then we'll also use the chat function to interact with each other. So I'd like to do a little trial to make sure everybody has found their chat function. So if you can find that and type, let's say in 1 word, 2 words max, tell me, how are you doing today? So while everybody's writing in their answers, my word today is hopeful. So I am hopeful that the economy will bounce back soon. I'm also hopeful that everyone is going to find some useful information during this webinar, hopeful that my kids will not come and interrupt me while I'm trying to talk to all of you. So I can see that some other people are saying they're doing well. You're right, the weather outside is just gorgeous now. Average, oh, well, hopefully by the end of this, Ray, you'll be better than average. We're gonna work on that.
Well, I'm feeling nervous.
Oh, you are, Josh?
I'm feeling nervous because I am the host. I hope that I will not do any silly technical mistakes during this webinar. And I do have my 2 kids somewhere who will not bang the door and keep the webinar running smoothly. But it's good to hear all of you are optimistic, stay positive. Great.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to get started then. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's just do that. Give me 1 little second, guys. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about transforming your CV into a marketing document. So we'll start with looking at the reasons why this is important. Then we're going to go through the various sections of your CV step by step to look at what should be included in each section. And we're also going to talk about some things that you shouldn't be including in your CV. And then we're going to workshop 2 CVs together to see how we took bad CVs and made them into good CVs. All right. For some reason it's not working. Sorry about that. So let's start. Why rewriting your CV? Why rewrite your CV? So your CV is the first impression that a company will have of you, right? It's your foot in the door. And often it's your only chance to secure an interview. So you need to view your CV as a marketing document. You're selling yourself and your skills as best you can in order to get in front of that hiring manager and give them a great interview. And that great interview is something we're going to cover in a webinar, in 2 webinars from now in 2 weeks, if you're interested. So since your CV is often going to be screened by an HR generalist first, and they may or may not know the specifics of the job that you've applied for, it becomes really important to have keywords from the job post in your CV. The HR generalist is probably going to do a Control F and search your CV for keywords. And if they find enough of them, they'll forward your CV to the hiring manager. So the first thing to learn is that if you don't include the right keywords and include them often enough in your CV, and if you don't have enough touch points from the job description, your CV can end up getting deleted before a hiring manager even has a chance to see it. Now let's talk about some of the information you're including in each section of your CV. So these different sections that we'll be looking at today include profile information, skills summary, educational information, employment history, volunteer history, and relevant scholastic projects. So we're going to take the time to look at each section individually and really thoroughly. So pull out your pens and papers, be prepared to take some notes. I mean, I'm so old school, pens and papers, or however you do take notes, and let's break it down. So the first section, which is generally at the top of a CV, is going to be a profile summary. And that profile summary is ideally somewhere between 1 and 4 sentences. It describes who you are, where you've been, where you want to go. It's important that you keep this section brief and you make sure that you highlight any relevant experience to the job you're applying for. It's basically an essential, it's essentially like a, how can I say, a reduced cover letter, if you will, because nobody's really doing cover letters anymore. And it should be tailored to each position that you're applying for. The intention is to show the hiring manager quickly and concisely that you are the best person for the job. You want to keep in mind that most employers are only going to spend a few seconds looking at your CV, unfortunately. And most of that time is spent looking at the top half of the first page. So there is a difference between a profile summary and writing what's considered an objective summary. And I'll give you an example of why the profile summary is generally a better way to go. So in this example, and forgive the super wordy slide, but we're going to read it together. An objective summary might read something like, experienced English teacher seeking position at independent school. Whereas the profile summary would state something more like, English teacher with 10 years of experience in independent school systems. Success in developing creative teaching strategies to achieve passing grade levels on statewide exams. So as you can see, there is quite a difference. Unlike an objective summary, the profile summary answers the question, what can this person do for me, the employer? So the profile summary is going to focus on the employer's needs and how you as the candidate can meet these requirements, rather than focusing on your own self-centric career objectives. The next section we're going to talk about is skills summary, something that's particular to the IT world. So this is a list of technologies that you're experienced with. It's important that you only list the technologies that you know and have used either scholastically or professionally. Some people will choose to list a level of knowledge, and if you're going to be doing that for either some or all of your skills, you want to be confident that you could pass a whiteboard test during an interview to back up the level of knowledge you've indicated on your CV. So a cursory knowledge of some programming language you used 8 years ago in your first year at university, that shouldn't be listed on your CV in the technology section. And as for the how, assuming you have quite a few technologies that you'll be listing, it's best to break them down into type of technology. So you'll want to separate programming languages, databases, development tools, etc. For someone less knowledgeable in your specific field, this will help keep things really clear and easy to read. And again, you're always keeping that HR person in mind when you review things on your CV. You want to make sure that your CV is getting pushed forward to the hiring manager. So far, Josh, before we move on, have there been any questions?
Under profile and skill summary, yes.
Okay.
The question is, do we have to follow the same order you mentioned?
Of course not. In your skills, I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. If you're referring to specifically the skills summary, you can put it in whatever makes sense for your particular specialty. If you're talking about putting either the skills summary or the profile summary first or second, it's definitely recommended to have the profile summary first. That's the first thing they're going to look at. It's 1 to 4 sentences, so really only a few lines about you and how you're the right person for the job. So that part you do want to put first.
Right. And the second one was how long the summary can be, the profile summary.
So again, a profile summary is just a couple sentences. It's really a condensed cover letter, and I see that somebody's commenting to hear that cover letters are no longer really used. They're surprised by that. It really is just a reality right now that we find. So as opposed to attaching a separate cover letter and then directly end your CV, it's really condensing your cover letter into just a couple lines and making it, the important thing is to always make it relevant for that employer, so that you're really addressing the question, why should I hire this person?
Makes sense. Thank you. That will be all.
Okay. So moving on to the educational information. If you have a university or college diploma, so there's obviously a few important details that you want to be sure you're including for each degree that you've achieved. So this includes the name of the institution, the name of the degree, the date of graduation, the location of the school if it isn't already obvious. Be sure to include details of any Canadian equivalencies that you may have obtained for your degrees. And if you have an incomplete degree, there's 2 ways you can handle it. You can either indicate it as in progress, in brackets after the degree, or some people list the amount of credits they've completed versus the number of credits required to obtain the degree. So again, in brackets, something like 45/60. You can consider adding your specialization or your GPA if it's particularly impressive, but those details are really optional. If you have any professional certificates, it's also a great idea to list them on your CV. Now, if you only have 1 or 2, you can easily group these into the same section and it becomes your education and certifications. If you have many different certifications, you'll likely want to create an entirely separate category for your certifications, a whole other section on your CV, in order to make things really easy to find, easy to read. For certifications, you want to include the year you were certified, any information about validity, if it needs to be renewed, anything like that, expiration dates, or any other relevant information that pertains to each certificate. Now we're going to talk about, in detail, the largest section of your CV, and this is your work experience. In this section, you'll be mentioning any work experience you have in chronological order, starting with the most recent. If you have any gaps in your work history, it's important to account for them. This can be as simple as 1 or 2 lines explaining what you were doing from when to when. It can be taking care of a sick family member or being on parental leave, taking a sabbatical, anything that would cover a period of 4 to 6 months or more. So for each position, there is vital information that you need to include in order to ensure that the reader really understands what you did, for who, when, and then the technologies that you used. The first is information relevant to the job. So your job title, the company name, a 1-sentence summary of what the company does, which is really important if nobody knows what that company is, where you were located while working for them, start and end dates, and be sure in your start and end dates you're including both the month and the year, as well as the mention if the job was permanent or contract, if you've had both types of positions throughout your career. As we can see in this particular example, the company and its location are clearly identified. We can see that the person started working there July 2018 specifically, and we have a 1-sentence explanation of what the company does, as well as a clear job title and an indication that the job was a permanent one. Now, if all you've ever had were contracts or permanent jobs, you don't need to specify. It's only if you've had a mix. You then include a detailed description of what the project scope was, and then obviously your involvement in it. You always want to be sure to start your bullet points with active verbs. So those are words like programmed, designed, implemented, maintained. You don't want to use vague and really highly overused words like responsible for, participated in, involved in. This doesn't give us an idea of what you really did. And just so you know, because active verbs can be pretty tricky, we're going to be sending you a checklist at the end of this webinar that summarizes sort of everything we talked about. And that's also going to include a link to helpful sites that give you ideas of action words that you can include in your CV. So in the bullet points for each position you've held, you want to be sure to integrate the technologies that you used regularly. And really don't be worried about repeating yourself. Of course, you're also going to list these technologies in the technical environment summary, which we're going to talk about in a couple seconds. But you also want to mention them in your bullet points because you're showing the reader that not only that you used a certain technology because you mention it later, but how you used it and in what way you were using it. So in this example that we're going to look at, we still have all the job details that we talked about before. But now we've added bullet points that are specific to the responsibilities this person held throughout their time at this company. Note the use of these active verbs: edited, architect, designed, created. There's also specific mentions of the technologies that were used and in what situation they were used. The last section for each position is a technical environment summary. So this is a list of all the technologies that you used on a regular basis in order to complete your work. This can include programming languages, types of tests that you completed, databases, cloud technology, sort of really anything that you touched regularly. This helps give the hiring manager an idea of the total work environment and all the different projects you were involved in. As we can see in this expanding example, the technical environment is listed underneath the job description bullet points, and it details the various technologies that this person used during their time at this company. Technologies that you used most frequently should be listed first, because there is an assumption that a technology mentioned at the end of this list is likely something that you're a bit less familiar with than the first few technologies that you list. I realize this was a lot of information going through education, through employment history. So have there been any questions, Josh?
Yes, a few of them.
Okay.
First is regarding the education part.
Yes.
I would like, okay. So the question was, what if the degree is from different country? What do you suggest?
That's absolutely still included. That's 100% valid that you have a degree from a different country. If you have received a Canadian equivalency, you do want to mention that specifically. But even if you haven't, or there's no need to, then you definitely mention it: bachelor's degree, master's degrees, anything that you've studied and graduated.
Right. And then there is another one. Please clarify what to do if the degree is incomplete but still relevant.
Okay, so I can say that again. So I'd mentioned it before. So the best thing to do if you have an incomplete degree is to either, if it is still in progress and you are planning on completing it, is after the degree name to specify in progress. And if it's not in progress in the sense of you did 2/3 of a degree but you're not planning on finishing it, then the best way to say that is either incomplete, but I like personally, and this is a personal choice, I prefer seeing how many credits you've done versus just incomplete, because that's still a little vague. The important thing to remember is that if you don't mention that it's in progress or incomplete or how many credits you've completed, there is an assumption that you graduated. And many employers are going to be doing background verifications after, which often include education verifications. And if you didn't specify that you did not complete this degree, it will be considered that you failed that background check if you didn't, if it's not clear in your CV that you don't have that degree.
Right. Another question I have, if the candidate has 20+ years of experience, is it possible that the CV is too long, or does it matter if the page is like 6-7 pages plus CV?
So there's two answers to that. Generally speaking, no, length doesn't matter anymore. There used to be the belief, 10, 15 years ago that your CV should never be more than 2 pages. That's out the window now. Nobody really follows that. Many people have 3-4 page CVs. I think when you're getting up to 6 or 7, you might want to try to find a way to be a little bit more concise about what you did in your jobs. Not each job needs to have 10 bullet points after it. Just putting the top 4 or 5 that are the most important, or combining them in any way that you can, would be good. Obviously, some CVs are very long, particularly people who've done a lot of contract work. So project managers and architects, people who jump through a lot of different positions, their CVs can get quite long. You want to try to make that as, sort of keep it to 4 or 5 pages max. But again, there's no hard and fast rule about this anymore. I would say, just as a side note to that too, that 1-page CVs are no longer at all recommended. People want more details than that. So you definitely don't want to just try to shove it all into 1 page just to make it look pretty. And it does look pretty, but there's just not enough detail there.
Yeah. You cannot help it. If you have 20 years experience, you have to expand your CV.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That will be all, Kim, at this point. I will let you know if there are other questions.
All right. So some people choose to include a section in their CV related to volunteer experience. So anything listed here should demonstrate passion and your drive. Anything related to the field you work in or the position you're applying for, that you're particularly proud of. If you are going to list some volunteer experience, you want to make sure that you're listing dates or the length of your involvement with each line that you're mentioning. You'll also, and we'll talk about it later in more detail, but there's also some things that you're going to want to avoid mentioning in this section. But let's go through the last section of your CV before we talk about the things that we want to avoid. So the last section that we're going to talk about today is scholastic experience. And obviously this is more relevant if you've graduated more recently and potentially have less work experience. But this includes any school projects or relevant classes, papers that you've published, or any other experience you feel is going to help highlight how qualified you are specifically for this job you're applying for. So like I said, this section is of particular importance if you've graduated recently and you don't have that much professional experience, but it can also be very interesting to mention projects or publications, even if they were a while ago, that are really relevant to the job that you're applying for or that the company you're sending your CV to. So in this thing, in this section is the same as the others. You want to mention your involvement in the project, the scope of the project, and any results that came from it. You want to include relevant dates. And if you do have a GitHub account, a link is often great to include at the top of your CV, but also a direct link to any projects you're mentioning, either in this section or volunteer experience, sort of depending on what the case is. We're going to talk about what to avoid in your CV now, but I think I saw a question popping up on my screen, but I'm not sure. Does somebody have a question?
No, I think it's one of the candidates. He raised his hand.
Okay.
I would recommend the participants to use the chat section or Q&A because you cannot speak or you cannot talk during the webinars. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, feel free, no problem, Aman. So feel free to post your question here or in the Q&A and then I'll get to it. So using that chat function, I'd love to know what you guys think things are that we should be avoiding writing on our CV. So let's brainstorm this together for a bit before I tell you what you should be avoiding, and tell me what you think different things are. Yeah, definitely. Somebody's mentioned spelling and grammar. Definitely needs to be checked. And bad experiences or mistakes that you've made. Absolutely. Is it okay to combine experiences? I've seen this if they're short stints of less than a year. Well, that was your question, Aman. Okay, so Aman is wondering if it's okay to combine experience of short stints. So I'll get to that in a second as soon as we're finished this things to avoid. So somebody's mentioning having kids or not. Absolutely, you don't want to talk about any sort of personal, exactly, Raphael, avoiding any irrelevant personal information. So that's stuff that we want to avoid, absolutely. And I'm going to explain a little bit more. Before doing that, I'll just answer Aman's question about combining experience. It is important that you're always clarifying if it's in the sense of, like, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by combining experience. If it is different employers, you cannot combine it, because if you're having an employment check or any kind of references or employment verification done as a background check, you need to have every employer listed clearly on your CV with the dates that you work there. There is a way, however, to combine it where, let's say you were in a permanent position for a few years, and then for the last 2 years you've been doing contracts and they've all been pretty short, is that you can title, you know, as a freelancer, these are the different things that I've done. But if it's different employers, you need to separate it out. In the event that there's a back check, you want to make sure that you're passing that back check.
So I do got some other things to avoid suggestions.
Oh, okay.
Kim?
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't see them.
First is the picture. We should avoid the picture.
Absolutely. Yes, that's not a standard here in Canada.
Personal information like address,
Yep.
like complete address. And one more, let me just scroll down. Ooh, marital status.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, so that's fantastic. So just to summarize what we just spoke about, some of the things that you want to avoid in your CV. So one that nobody did mention is references. So these should only be given if requested and should never be listed on your physical CV, on your CV directly. You want to avoid people burning your references and overcalling them, overusing them. We have to be really careful when you're applying for jobs that your references are really only given to positions where you really think you have a shot at getting it, and that it's only provided when it's asked for. Another example of things that we want to avoid, like we just talked about, is personal details. So I would say, I would agree with whoever mentioned no physical address. That's becoming less and less. That is sort of a personal choice. You can include your physical address if you want to, but all other sort of personal details we talked about, marital status, a picture of yourself, your date of birth, where you live, sort of where you were born, anything, your religious status, anything like that, you obviously don't want to put on there. And then like I said, the religious thing, the last one, is any religious or political affiliations that you have, you do want to avoid mentioning. And that's what I sort of briefly touched on in the volunteer section earlier, is to be careful depending on what if you were volunteering for something that was either religious or political based. It doesn't mean that you can't mention it, but depending on where you're applying, you might want to be careful about what you mention there.
Kim, I do have some question under volunteer section if you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Somebody is asking, what kind of volunteer work should I include in my CV? Apart from, you mentioned religious, we should not mention it.
So most people that will include volunteer experience is either something that you've been doing for a long time and you're really proud of, or something that's relevant to the job. So, you know, if you're a web developer and you volunteered to help, you know, a local community group or a local company to build their website, something like that, then that's absolutely something that's worth mentioning. And on top of it, if you have, you know, something like a portfolio, a link to show them to what it is, even better. Volunteer experience that's just, you know, one day here and there, volunteering at my kids' school on the home and school committee that I do, is not something that I'm going to mention on my CV. So it really just becomes a personal thing of what you think is relevant and what you think is irrelevant. We do want to make sure that your CV is staying as specific to that employer as possible. Right. I do see that somebody's asking the question too about what email address format is acceptable. I have also heard that Hotmail is outdated, but people still use it regularly. So I don't think that it's particularly important what the domain name is attached to your email. However, the first part is, so, you know, when you're younger and you create the email, you know, kimisthebest@yahoo.com is probably, I'm probably going to need to update that a little bit to, you know, kimbirdsell@yahoo.com when I'm applying for jobs. So, and in the same way, a lot of people's email addresses might include their year of birth. You need to be careful about that as well, and consider creating a separate email address just for job applications that doesn't have your year of birth in it.
Nice. There's another question under scholastic experience projects. Someone is asking if the scholastic experience they have, but it's very short, is it worth mentioning it?
No, I'm not 100% sure what that means as very short, like in the sense of a 3-week course that you did. Yes, there are some online courses that are definitely worth mentioning that are very short. Again, I think it needs to be very relevant to the position you're applying for if it becomes worth mentioning. So this is a section that might be editable depending on the role that you're applying for, depending on the company you're applying for. If you did some courses, I don't know, in specific to AI or voice recognition, even if it was for only a couple weeks and you're applying to a company that does that, then definitely worth mentioning. If the company that you're applying for is in the real estate industry, then maybe they're less interested in that. So I think you have to be careful also that if you're one of those people, and they definitely exist, that does lots and lots of online classes, you don't want your education section to be an entire page long because they're not going to read it. It's going to get lost in the shuffle. So really only mentioning things that are relevant to the position you're applying for.
Right. And under personal details, we have another question, interesting one. One candidate is saying that he moved from one place to another, so from Montreal to Vancouver. So he was living in Montreal, so he's still using the Montreal number. Is it confusing for the employers if he's trying to find a job in Vancouver?
Yes, definitely. There is, I mean, some people, we're getting more and more used to seeing numbers that aren't here, but there is the immediate assumption that you would be located in Montreal if it's a 514. So I would say there's no issues in that particular case of writing something on your CV at the top of, you know, currently located in Vancouver, or something along of where you're looking for a position in Vancouver. And especially if you're living there now, yeah, you would want to specify that because that can be quite confusing. And you wouldn't want your CV to be deleted from somebody in HR who goes, oh, we're never going to pay for relo. And then it gets deleted when they don't need to pay for it because you're actually living a couple blocks away from the company. I hope that helps answer that question.
Well, I will say new city, new number.
Well, yes, if you haven't gotten around to it yet.
Exactly. One more question I have. It's about one candidate is saying that when they see IT positions in any social website, they want to apply it, but sometimes they are not eligible because the positions are posted in French as well as in English. So can they still apply for the positions, or they should not because of the language requirement?
Now this is a multiple part answer to that question. And you're probably not going to like that my answer starts with, it depends. Because I know it's not a, you know, black and white kind of answer. So if the job description specifically mentions must be fluently bilingual, then no, I wouldn't. If you're not fluently bilingual, there's no need in applying, and you're potentially just burning bridges with either that hiring manager or HR manager or recruiter if it's through a company, because they're just going to see you are applying to every sort of position and not being specific on what you're applying for. That being said, if there is a mention for the need for English and French, or English and or French, but let's just go with English and French specific to this, but without overtly saying, you know, is a must, is required, then I would still send your CV. We have clients who are looking for somebody who's bilingual, but are willing to consider somebody who, and by bilingual, I mean French English, sorry for everybody who's bilingual and it's not French English. So who are bilingual French English, but are open to the idea of having somebody who doesn't speak one of those two languages. So the job posting will still say looking for somebody who speaks both French and English, but we know that they're willing to consider somebody who isn't. So if your experience is just phenomenal and stellar and you are 100% fit for this position, other than that one detail blocking you that you don't speak French or you don't write in English or whatever it is, then I would still send your CV. So I'm sorry that that's not such a clear answer, excuse me, but I think it really depends. You can also, if you're really interested in that particular position, take the time to do some research online to see, is that company bilingual? Internally within that company, do people only speak French, or do people only speak English, or do they speak a mix of both? Because if you find out that the company is only Francophone internally by doing some looking, research on LinkedIn and looking at their webpage and different, Glassdoor and things like that, if you learn that they only speak French internally, then it's probably not somewhere that you're going to fit in, even if you have the qualifications.
Yeah, and I would say apart from the research, companies in Quebec are obliged to post the jobs in English as well as French. If French or English is really, really important, then they will mention it under the requirement skill set. So
that's a really good point, Josh.
Yeah.
That there is a legal requirement that jobs are posted in both languages.
Sure.
Very good point.
We have another point. What about major professional accomplishments? Do you think it's better to mention it under our job responsibility section?
Yes. As we'll see in one of the CVs we're going to workshop a bit later, somebody had put them and they put them specific to the job, because some people will list them sort of at the end of their CV or at the, in a different section of their CV, but then we don't know where you had that accomplishment, where you completed that amazing thing that you did, or where you received the award for something that you did. So you definitely want to do it per job, because it really gives context to the accomplishment that you have.
Excellent.
All right.
Please carry on.
Perfect. Okay. Keep the questions coming, guys. This is wonderful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to workshop this stuff. So we're going to take a look at the good, the bad, when it comes to CV writing. So we have two different CVs we're going to look at. First, we'll look at the bad versions and we'll workshop it and get you guys to write in the comments things that you think need to be improved. Excuse me. And then we'll show you the good. And then we'll do the same for a second CV. So here we go. So here's an example, and this is the full CV. I hope that you can see it clearly. It's a 2-page CV. And this is an example clearly of a CV that needs work. So in the chat, what kind of things do you think need to be changed in order to make this a more successful CV?
I'm checking the chat, Jim.
Yeah, I got it open too, don't worry. Absolutely, Mark. So remove marital status, date of birth, nationality, address, all that stuff shouldn't be in there. Yeah, exactly, Rihanna. Much of that can be removed. Raphael too. So everybody's noticing the personal info. What else can we change? Absolutely. So hold on, sorry, the comments are coming in fast. So they can expand on how they actually contributed to their work instead of these generic statements that they're saying. Their education section, absolutely, again, Mark, lacking in details. We don't have a date that they accomplished it. We definitely need, like Fernando's saying here too, more details about projects, about what they did for their jobs. There really isn't very much explanation at all.
And Rehanna, you're right. We need to remove the numbering as well.
Yeah, remove the numbering. Good point, Rihanna. As Jella's saying, yeah, the education with more details, maybe what they focused on in their studies, the location of the school, where is Amazing College? I don't know. So yeah, so there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done here. I would even touch on something that we didn't talk about earlier, but if you are going to be listing language skills as this person did here, consider listing it as a percentage as opposed to good, because good is not very clear. It's quite a relative term. So either percentages or, professional proficiency. That's kind of the same way LinkedIn will break it down into conversational, professional, or fluently, like I don't remember the last one in LinkedIn, but essentially it's fluent. So consider listing it really more more detailed than just the word good. It needs also a good summary. Absolutely. This CV is lacking a profile summary that tells us sort of in a quick, brief snapshot why this person is the right person for the job. So let's take a look at, these are all really good points, guys. Let's take a look at the corrected version of this. Now you'll see that it's quite a bit longer. So we're going to take a look at it at its pages separately because it's on 3 pages, and then trying to combine it was just making the typing too small for you guys to be able to see it well. So here we can see, the profile, much more interesting, talks about their experience, that they're embedded. And then we can assume that the technologies that they've listed here, like Eclipse, NetBeans, all that stuff, was relevant to the particular job that they're applying for. If not, there would be no need to mention it here. We can also see that their technical proficiencies have been clarified. They've been broken down into different types. There's a date that's been added. And it was in this, I don't know why the formatting came out, but the formatting was better of the date in the original version of this CV, but a date was added to the education. And then obviously, as we go through the next few pages, we're going to see they put a lot more detail of their employment history. So if we go through, if we remember just quickly, the one line that we have here of the main project features, this is all the information they had put. In this worked on CV, we now have 1, 2, and 3 pages of details. So much better. This is specific. I'm just going to go back a page. So now we've got the dates listed, project scopes are mentioned, what the different projects they worked on. We really get a better idea, as we talked about earlier, some achievements here of what they did, the technical environment. We really have so much of a better idea of what they did. And this CV makes them look so much more of a senior candidate, which they were, than they did in their first version of their CV, which actually made them look quite junior in that they really didn't have very much experience. So that would be one example. Another example, so this is also going to be on 2 pages here. So this is an example of a bad CV as well. I shouldn't use the word bad, of a CV that needs work. So let me know, what do you guys see here? And I'll keep it on page 1 for a little bit. And then I'll switch over to page 2. Just to give you an idea, page 2 here talks about all the work experience. So they haven't forgotten to mention it. It's there, it's just on page 2. So just on page 1 here, what can we see that needs to be worked on? The formatting is bad. I agree, the formatting is bad. The personal projects, it's unnecessary potentially. I would stand to say it's not necessarily unnecessary, the personal project section, but it's not detailed enough. It really doesn't give us an idea of what they actually did. There is no contact info, you're right. This was likely a formatted CV that we sent, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on the contact info, but you're right that it should be there. Needs structure in the technical skills section, Patrick is saying, and I agree with you, Patrick. I think this is a little hard to read for at least the ideas, the main points are bolded, the sections, but it still could be a lot clearer. Now somebody's saying to remove the personal GitHub account. That's really a choice. Some people do choose to include it, and we'll see in the improved CV how this person then integrated some GitHub into their CV. So let's look at the second page of this CV, which is their job experience, work experience. So what can we do to make this better? Yeah, so somebody's saying that the summary really gives no information. The language is really vague. Absolutely. It doesn't really specify website improvements. That could mean 100 different things. There needs to be the inclusion of technologies in the CV. Absolutely, good point, Rajeshri. There's no technologies are listed at all, so we don't know what they used and where they used it. Mark, you're saying the same thing about the technologies. Absolutely. And Patrick, we need more details in the summary. 100%. I would also point out that the dates here, it's pretty vague. So 2015 to 2016, 2016 to 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19. So the way this is written, let's say as an example, this position, they could have been there for 2 months. So from December 2016 to January 2017, or maybe they were there for almost 2 years, from February 2016 to November 2017. There's no way of knowing. And that can, so this person looks particularly jumpy because of that. So perfect. So wonderful, really great comments, everybody. Let's take a look and see what the corrected version looks like. So again, it's going to be on a couple different pages. So first, if we can remember, the education was previously pretty confusing. The formatting was all off. They've separated here the technical skills. So it's a lot easier to read. There should be contact info up here. That comment, I think it was Rihanna that made earlier. You're right about that. It is blinded here because it was sent to a client. So we didn't think to put it back for this, for the purposes of this, but we will for next time. So thank you for pointing that out. We do see here too, their profile is very detailed about the different technologies that they've used. Again, we're assuming, and well, we know that these are the technologies that this client was looking for. So this is really interesting. And then they're talking specifically about what their passions are, this being what the client does. If the client is not in e-commerce and your passion is in e-commerce, you don't want to say that on your CV, because then they're going to say, why are you applying for this job if you're looking? So you're going to leave as soon as you find the e-commerce position. It is easier to make words like GitHub in the top section URLs rather than having a long URL. Yes, 100% agreed. So let's look at the next section. So here we see now the work summary, and just so you know quickly, we're going to keep going further on. There's a third page. So now they've specified in this work summary, what does the company do? Because before we had no idea what the company did, when they were there exactly, and what they did with these great action verbs that we see here, and including the technologies that they've used, and then a list at the end of all the technologies that they've used. I don't right now, I just got the question if we have any resumes specific to sales. We don't today, we're really looking more at IT position, but I'd be happy to look through some with you, Aman. We can talk about that offline. On the third page here, we do see personal projects, as I think it was Mark earlier had mentioned, that the personal projects were really just sort of superfluous before. There was no point in mentioning them, there just was no detail. Here, at least now that they've been broken down, we really do get a much better idea of what they've done. So the app, when they did it, in what language, here's a link specifically to that, and a specific link to the app if we want to go pull it up. So this is a much more interesting personal projects section.
Kim, we have a couple of questions while you were away. So Patrick is saying, is it okay to remove the months in the employment history?
To remove the months?
Yeah.
No. It's really important actually to put those months there, because it, like I was saying, it gives a really good, it gives a much better idea of how long you were actually at the company for. Because saying you worked somewhere in 2017 can literally mean you worked there for a day, or you worked there for 365 days. And so there's just not enough detail there. And it can be quite frustrating when you're looking at a CV with multiple positions in the same year, or positions that cross over the same year. Then it's really hard to know exactly how long people were there for. And particularly if you're applying for permanent positions, stability can be really important to certain hiring managers. So they want to really get an idea of how often you're changing jobs. So I would say that the months are really quite necessary.
And one is saying about the formatting of the CV. Could education section can be at the end of the CV?
Absolutely. That's really most people will put it near the beginning, but it really is a personal preference, particularly if your education is quite some time ago. It might make more sense to put it at the end, or if your education isn't particularly relevant. You know, you studied some sort of something relevant, or something in a different field, and you did a minor in what you're working in now, then it doesn't make sense to put it at the very top of your CV. If you are putting it at the top of the CV, it has to be because it's of particular relevance to that employer and to that position. Because don't forget that most people, for the first skim of your CV, is going to be the top half of that first page. So whatever is going to get you that interview is going to get them to continue reading your CV needs to be in the top half of that first page. Are there any other questions, Josh?
No. Thank
Okay,
you.
wonderful. So that resumes the end of our workshopping here. So we're getting to the end of our webinar. Sorry, forgot that word. So I would love to know if there's anything in particular today that you guys found really useful. What were your takeaways? Maybe the top 1 or 2 things that you learned and that you're going to now use when you go out and update your CV tonight, tomorrow, this weekend.
So while the chat mentioned on the chat, I have another question, Kim, for you to answer.
Absolutely.
What about functional resume over a chronological resume? What do you think?
So the tendency, there was a period of time where functional resumes were quite popular, and that was a few years ago. Right now, the tendency is to do chronological, and I've always personally preferred them. That is more of a personal thing, though, even when they weren't as popular. Because the problem with the functional is that the person reading the CV doesn't get an idea for how long you've done that thing. So you might list 12 things that you're really good at, but we don't know where you did them, when you did them, for what type of company. So it really is more, it's highly recommended these days to do a chronological CV and not a functional CV any longer.
Right. So we do have some takeaway comments if you missed, Kim.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I was answering.
No need for physical address.
Was definitely new. Absolutely. Great. Okay, now I'm seeing them.
Yeah, okay.
To treat it as a marketing document, 100%. It really is your marketing document. It's the first impression you're going to make in a company, and what you're trying, hopefully not the last impression you're going to make. So really important. Oh, Fabrice, the fact that you can make it more than 2 pages. Absolutely. Feel free, especially with, I know you, with the amount of experience you have, you should be making it more than 2 pages. Okay. So Rajeshri is saying her takeaway is using the technical environment to better highlight the tech skills and experience. Fantastic. Yeah, and you want to also make sure, just to add to that, that you're putting those technical points not just in the summary, but also in the bullet points. They should appear in both. There's nothing better than an HR, coordinator who has no idea what you do, who's looking at your CV, go Control F, Java, for example, and it pops up in 20 different places in your CV, more instead of just 1 or 2 at the bottom of your technical environments. Okay, I'm seeing Patrick is saying he learned to summarize the description part of the employment history and emphasize accomplishments. Absolutely. Mark, lots of good ideas for structuring your CV, adding items, very useful webinar. You're welcome. He says, thank you. Fantastic. The summary is very important, Alex. I agree with that. So wonderful, guys. I'd really like to thank everybody for attending the webinar today. Just so that you know, we will be sending you all by email our CV writing checklist. And like I said, it does include a link to a site that has some really great action verbs that you can use on your CV, because those are sometimes really hard to come up with. So next time, our next webinar in 1 week, we're going to be talking about navigating the job market right now in today's reality. That includes a really important section about making your LinkedIn profile as stellar as possible. So similar to the way that we went through CVs today, we're going to be looking at LinkedIn profiles next time. So it's going to be happening next Thursday, same time. So in a few minutes, I'm also going to be sending, in about half an hour or so by the time I get it together, sending you guys a post-webinar survey. Now, I would so very much appreciate it if you could take the time to fill it out. It only takes about 3 minutes. There's 7 questions. It's a really quick thing, but it gives us such useful information on what we did well, what we didn't do so well, how can we continue to improve this webinar for the next time that we're going to give it. So I would really appreciate it if you could take that. It's going to come by email. And then the other documents that I mentioned are going to follow shortly later today, at the very latest tomorrow. You'll be getting them all.
Right. And Kim, before we say bye to consultants, I think I have a very good question.
Okay.
And it's debatable, okay?
Uh-oh.
So it's about, what about the gap due to COVID-19? Because I guess many of our friends from our webinar today, they might have lost the job. So how do they mention it on the CV?
I would definitely mention if it was a layoff directly related to COVID-19, in the same way that before we were talking about mentioning in brackets, if it's a contract or a permanent, there's no harm in saying, I was, project manager, whatever it was, October 2019 to March 2020, laid off due to COVID-19, or just laid off. There's a real understanding right now from employers that there's a lot of unemployed people, and they might have been unemployed for a few months. So it'll be a little less, it doesn't reflect as badly, obviously, as it normally would if you had a big gap on your CV. It might be questionable. Right now it isn't. It's just an unfortunate reality that a lot of people are facing. But I would mention it, that you were laid off, and that'll help explain why you're unemployed right now.
Yeah, and from recruiter's point of view, I will mention that you should mention the end date of your previous contract or permanent job, so that recruiters can see visibility that you are available because you got laid off or you finished your contract, so that you are actively working and we can recruit you straight away.
Actively not working, you mean, but yes.
Yeah, actively,
you're actively available.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
You're actively available. Yeah, I get it. Wonderful. Were there any other comments, any other questions, Josh, before we log off?
No, I think we are fine.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you next week, and have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.